Okay, so let's go to being a Cardinal at Stanford.
Well,
So obviously you're on a baseball team, but what was social life like? Like you were a college athlete. What was life like at Stanford?
well, there were three events, and then I'll get to what my life was like. I was a student, I played baseball, and my scholarship covered my tuition, but it didn't cover my room and board. So for all 4 years at Stanford, I was what is called a hasher. That meant I served food and was in the kitchen doing the dishes, big dishwasher. Now, I wasn't stupid because I was interested in some kind of a dating life. So my first 2 years, I hashed at a dorm called Robley Hall, and it was all freshman women. And I would serve breakfast like 7 a.m. around these tables. So that was a good way to meet people, if you will. But the main world was I didn't date. Then my sophomore year, I joined the Sigma Chi fraternity. And I want to share something about that was really remarkable to me. I remember our new class, we were sophomores, the guys that joined Sigma Chi. We were in a room to meet each other because many of us hadn't met because we were raised in different dorms. We stayed in different dorms. Anyway, we went around and we said who we were. Well, I had shared earlier that I had made a decision to go into the ministry. But people started introducing themselves. And the first guy said, "My name is Pat Wilkinson, and my dad is Bud Wilkinson, the head football coach at the University of Oklahoma." And I thought, whoa, this guy's pretty popular. The next guy said, "My name is Scott Romney, and my dad, George Romney, is the governor of Michigan, and I have a younger brother whose name is Mitt Romney." And they said, "Mark, who are you?" And I said, "I'm from Portland, Oregon, and my dad is Henry Miller." And the room just looked at me, and every guy gasped, "Wait a minute, you're going into the ministry and your dad is Henry Miller?" I had no idea what was going on. Well, it turns out that in those days, Henry Miller was a world-renowned pornographer.
Oh no.
He wrote, and I probably should go read them just to see what it's about. Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn or something. And I said, no. My dad is Henry Miller. He's in Portland, Oregon, and he's a garbage man.
Wow.
But that struck me. My junior year, I dated a freshman who was from Dallas. I remember her name was Virginia Frances Price. She was great, and we had a really nice relationship, very, very plus. Her parents came up from Dallas and watched me pitch once, all that sort of thing. And I thought, maybe this will have a future. Well, the summer between my junior and senior year, I had knee surgery because I tore a cartilage playing baseball in the semi-pro league in Portland. And I was in the hospital, and in those days, there was no arthroscopic surgery. I didn't say that right. Anyway, so I was in the hospital for 7 days. And my mom came and visited, of course, every day. And she brought me a letter that I got from Denny Price in Dallas. And I opened it, and it was a "Dear John, I'm not coming back to Stanford. I've rehooked up. I've relinked with my boyfriend, and I'm going to transfer to SMU." So I thought, well, there that goes. But anyway, my senior year, my social life was primarily dating one person. Her name is Sherry Fraser. She was from somewhere in Central Oregon. She was really just a lovely person. She then went to France because Stanford had overseas programs. And then I ended up graduating and, going to New Haven, Connecticut. So that didn't develop at all. But she was a very nice person. And that was pretty much my social life. But mainly at Stanford, I was a student, I was a hasher, and I played baseball.
Okay, so you're playing baseball and you get offers from the Dodgers and the Pirates.
Yes.
And then how did that coincide with Yale?
I had applied to Yale.
Because you knew you wanted to.
I wanted to be a minister.
What did you graduate with? What kind of degree from Stanford?
It was called a bachelor's degree.
Of?
A Bachelor of Art. I was in American history. And I got a double focus, American history and psychology.
Okay.
Now, I want to say something about my decision to not play pro ball. First of all, I knew if I signed a contract, I really wasn't that good. I'm not trying to be false humble. In those days, the University of Southern California was the best baseball school in the nation. My junior year, they had 11 players sign professional contracts. That is big. But I also knew if I signed a professional contract, I would be like in a rookie league, probably somewhere up in Montana, pitching against future Hall of Famers. I wouldn't be that. But I had a funny experience. My junior year, before I was offered a contract, I took a class on writing essays. And I had a teaching assistant by the name of Louis Rudelow, had been a former priest. He was my teacher. So I'd write a 6 to 8 page essay every week, and then I'd meet with him for an hour. Well, for a half an hour, he would go over my writing and how I could make it better. But then he wanted to talk about baseball. And he was my strongest encourager on wanting me to sign a baseball contract. He said, if you will sign and by the way, there was no big bonus. There was no big signing contract. Maybe, this was 1962, maybe $500 or something. Well, in that day, that was good money. But be that as it may, he kept asking me to reconsider. You can always go to seminary. Yeah, you're accepted to Yale, but they'll put it on hold. They'll understand. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I loved the moment. He looked at me and he said, besides, look at it this way. You have the same initials as Mickey Mantle. And he ended up becoming a professor, a very loved professor at Stanford. God rest his soul. He died a couple of years ago. I never kept contact with him, but I did follow his, look at him. And when I got the notice of his obituary, I gave a prayer of thanks for at least he had support for me.
So Yale, so you chose Yale.
I chose Yale. In those days, there was a seminary in Berkeley, but my whole life had been on the West Coast. 18 years in Portland, 4 years in Palo Alto, California, and I had no idea where I'd end up being a minister, so I thought I should go east. I applied to 2 seminaries, a very prominent seminary in New York City called Union Theological Seminary, and then Yale University Divinity School. When I was accepted at Yale, I just said, that's what I'm going to do. So that's why I went there. Tremendous professors, very internationally known. So I benefited from great teaching and good education.
Okay, and then after Yale, tell me about your ministry. How did it begin and how did it take off?
After Yale, since I was going to get married in June of 1966, my wife Nancy was a student at the University of Chicago. I interviewed for a job at St. Paul's Church in Chicago near North Side. Fred Trost and Herb Davis were on the pastoral staff. It was the best 3.5 years. I learned. It was like seminary. Fred was the consummate pastor. Herb was like a prophet. We'd call him a left-wing radical today, but he kept his base as a minister of the church. So I learned from both of them. With no doubt, there was an event that happened at St. Paul's that probably impacted my ministry more than any other event. In August of 1968, there was the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. In those days, there were radical youth movements. They were called hippies. And they wanted to conduct an alternate Democratic convention where they'd nominate a pig for president. They went to Lincoln Park and to Grant Park. Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago brought back a 1920s law that said public parks need to be vacated by 11 p.m. They were getting rid of these hippies. Well, what we decided, Fred Trost, Herb Davis, and I, with members of our governing board, we would open up our gymnasium and our fellowship hall to have those hippies stay with us. I wore a clergy collar so I could be identified as a minister, as a priest. And we went right into the park. I had been tear gassed. I've had policemen put, what do you call it? The batons, their club under my throat, pushed me up against a brick wall in an alley, the whole bit. But what we did is that we handed out flyers saying, you can come and stay with us. So it started Sunday night and it ended Friday morning. We housed over 400 hippies every night. And since I was the young guy, I was 28, I stood at the front porch of the church and I personally welcomed every one of those hippies. And I said, you're welcome here, but no drugs and no contraband, meaning no knives or guns. Mm-hmm. I don't want your knives or guns, ditch them somewhere, but not in the church. And I want your medicine. I've got to get it from you, but I'm only going to return what's in a prescription bottle. And they were so wanting to come inside, they cooperated. So by 4 a.m, I probably was the hottest guy in the neighborhood with pockets full of drugs. And they never really challenged me on not giving back what they probably shouldn't have. So I just felt it was responding. Well, it turns out members of the church hated what we did. They thought it was the worst thing in the world. How could you house all those communists? On and on. The next Sunday, they called a special church meeting, and the purpose was to fire Fred because he had not acted faithfully to the church. That was their mantra. Well, Herb and Fred and I were bonded together like brothers. We were brothers in ministry. And we decided if they fired Fred, we'd walk with them. We were not going to stay there. No way. Well, the meeting started, and you have never heard such venom, such vitriol. We were hated, and there was one guy who was particularly loud and brash, and it just was building up, it was kind of getting bigger and bigger, and I thought, oh boy, we're done. Then a lady raised her hand. She was not very tall. Her name is Georgia Smith, and she asked if she could speak. She had a very soft voice, so people had to be quiet to listen to her. It's almost like I was there right now. Georgia said, "My name is Georgia Smith. My husband Nick and I are members of the church. I was baptized, confirmed. We were married in this church. We have 2 daughters that have just been baptized, and they're going to be confirmed, and hopefully if they marry, they'll marry here. I've heard what you said about our pastors. I want you to know that I am a nurse in a geriatric wing at Bethany Hospital. And on my floor was Fräulein Krieger, who is a charter member of our church. She was dying of hardening of the arteries. In that time, just a couple weeks ago, Pastor Trost and his wife were in Germany on vacation. But one day, Pastor Trost sent a postcard to Fräulein Krieger. He wrote it in German. I took the card and I read it to Fräulein Krieger, saying that he was with her, he was praying for her, and that she knows that she's in God's care forever. I read that to her. The next morning she died. She died knowing the love of her pastor and the love of her church. Don't any of you say these men are not our pastors. The man who had been the most vociferous stood up and started singing the doxology, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow," and the meeting ended. Our job was secure. That was in August of 1968. Today is February of 2020. Fred Trost and I are still the dearest of friends. And every phone conversation we have, we end it by saying to each other, "Pastor, keep mailing your postcards." That has shaped my ministry. Not any preaching that may have been helpful, not any programs. I was a pastor at a soup kitchen when my last ministry in Illinois in Elmhurst, be that as it may. But that lesson has stuck with me and been part of who I am and how I want to be known.
Okay, so kind of summarize your minister career. From
My ministry,
Chicago to Eugene to
my churches I've served: Chicago, Eugene, Lakewood, Colorado. Oh, in Lakewood, the Broncos asked me to be their chaplain, but I couldn't be their chaplain because I'd have to change the time of worship at Lakewood, and that would have been egocentricity. So I said, no, I'm sorry, I won't do it. But after Lakewood was Colorado Springs, then was Hudson, Ohio, then was Elmhurst, Illinois. After Elmhurst, a friend of mine said, you should be a conference minister. And in our denomination, it's sort of like Methodist or Episcopal. It was a bishop. So then I came in 1997 to Austin, Texas, where I was conference minister. I worked with 100 churches in Texas, Louisiana, and a project helping the poor in Biloxi, Mississippi. I did that for 8 years, and then I went to Seattle for three years as a conference minister. So that would have been from 2005 to 2008. And then since 2008, I've served in interim ministries until a couple years ago. And now I preach just maybe once a quarter where Diane and I go to worship at St. David's Episcopal in Austin.